Hello and welcome to the Boat Shed. Today we are going to start things off by taking a look at these old deck prisms. Try and breathe some new life into these. Why don't you come along with me? If you've been watching the channel for a while, you'll know that the deck of this sailboat is full of old rotten plywood and balsa. And one of the biggest jobs ahead of us is rebuilding that deck entirely. Now, of course, recently we've added to that the bulwark, which has a similar problem and will need a similar repair, but more on that later. For now, let's stay focused on the deck. As we're working our way back, replacing that old wood core with new foam, the decision has come up on whether we should keep or remove all of these old deck prisms. It's the easiest thing to do to just cover over them and keep moving back the deck, but I really do like the natural light these provide. So one of the things I'm looking at is a way to keep these. Now, I've thought about a couple of different ways to reinstall these prisms with different levels of complexity and expense. And I think that what I've settled on that we're going to try today is a good middle road. And so I'll show you what I'm thinking there in a second. But first, let's go take a look at where these are going to go back to. Welcome back to the familiar forward location aboard Antidote. And you'll notice here, these two holes are the locations where these prisms are going to go back into. We'll notice here that we already have new glass on the base. The hatch has been covered with core material. And before we can bring new core material back, cover this whole area, we really need to figure out how these are going to get installed. So that's the reason why I want to take a look at these today. Now, before we go ahead with that, let's take a look inside the boat and see what kind of difference these provide in terms of the lighting inside the boat. See if it's a dramatic difference or not. Up now on the forward head, and you can appreciate maybe a little bit that the lighting in here is a little on the dim side. We have a lot coming through this forward hatch, probably more than the prisms will provide, but the prisms provide a really interesting light. So we'll see what it looks like. So right now this is what we have with it all blacked out. There is a bit of light cheating through some of the fiberglass. That will of course not be the case in a real world situation, but it's January and it's 2 o'clock, so the light is a little bit low in the sky. Anyway, let's now open those up and see how it looks. I'm using the trim rings here to support the glass on the fiberglass so it doesn't fall through. Well, what do you think? It's probably not appreciably brighter in here on this angle, but as I look up and look around, seeing the light coming through the prisms is really elegant. There's a special character to it that is not like the hatch at all. It's almost like it's a very angelic almost look. So I think they're really cool. We're going to try and keep them. So we press forward. So Antidote actually has 6 of these prisms on board. There's these 2 in the forward head. There's 1 over the galley, 1 over the nav station, and then 1 in the corner of the master's cabin, and then in the aft head. Now that one I didn't actually know was there because when I got the boat it was actually covered up. There was a spare piece of glass in the hold, and it wasn't until I took the teak deck off that I realized that there was, in fact, another prism location there. All right, well, with that, I think I'm going to do a little bit of light reading, so if you guys don't mind, I'll just catch up on this book, and then I'll see you back down in the shop. If you're new here, welcome. My name is John, and this boat here is Antidote. Now, I am not a pro boat builder. I'm an engineer and a sailor with a dream of fixing up this old boat to go sail around the world someday, but we have a lot of work to do first. Now let's stay right on track and I'll show you what I'm thinking with those prisms inside the shop. How are we going to reinstall these prisms? An obvious first question might be, why not just put them back exactly the way that they came out? And the answer is that these were actually bedded into the teak decks and sealed up and screwed down, and not actually the deck fiberglass construction itself. So I'm curious to know if any of these boats were built without the teak decks. I don't believe there are any that were. And that was used as part of the construction method to mount these and hide some other imperfections in the deck construction. So physically it'll be impossible to mount these the way that they originally were unless we put a teak deck back in, which we know we're not planning to do at this point. Add to that, the original construction method was definitely not adequate, as the wood doesn't really provide a great seal, and all of these, when I received the boat, were covered in this blue tape sticky covering, which I think was to keep any water from getting through the prisms leaking into the boat. I don't know how long that was on there before I acquired the boat, but that's how I received it, so I know these were all leaking. The first idea that came to mind was something that I showed in a previous rendering, and it was this solid 3/4 inch G10 block. My thought was that I could mill out this G10 block and get everything situated so that it's all solid, there's nowhere for it to leak, these trim rings would be reinstalled with G10 threaded inserts instead of the screws into the old deck. So this would provide no leak paths for the water, and I thought this was a great way to go. The problems with this are that it's very expensive for the G10, for one thing. It's also going to be more difficult to machine, and it's going to create a lot of wasted G10. It's a very expensive material, so my next thought was to build something similar, but instead of using one solid piece, to build basically rails, glue all of this together, and this would provide a very similar function, but it's also very complicated and expensive. So what I think we're going to try here first today is to actually build a part that looks kind of like this. And the way that we'll do this is we'll actually lay this up to make a part that we'll be able to pull some fiberglass parts back off of. So we're going to make the mold, we're going to try to get it all smoothed out, get all those good release agents on there, and then try to lay some glass up on it and see if we can actually build a part that is going to have the shape that we want. And then I'll probably put some G10 blocks in behind, just some small ones. I'll glue them in with the threaded inserts so that we can get the fasteners back together. And we're going to see how this works. A bit of an experiment, but hopefully it'll be a lot of fun. Now, the first thing I want to do is get all these prisms cleaned up. I want this old guy to look more like that. So let's get started on that first. Let's take a quick second to say thanks to the folks on Patreon that really helped make this channel a possibility, especially the folks whose names are appearing now on the screen. Thank you all so much. Back to the video. The first thing I'm going to do here to make these molds is measure everything really carefully. So I've made some detailed plans here. I think I know what I'm going to do for cutting all these out. And I'm cutting the parts sort of exact to where I want them to end up, maybe just a little on the small side, because I'm planning on coating this whole thing in some CSM fiberglass before we continue, because I'm using MDF as the building blocks for this piece, and that might be an odd choice. I haven't made a lot of molds before. MDF is not typically known as a very strong material to build things out of, but I'm hoping that by covering it with some glass, I can give it that strength that it needs to hopefully pull at least 2 parts off. Maybe I need to do all 6 with this. We'll see. Everything that I'm cutting on the saw has a 2-degree angle on it, a draft angle, and that's just so that I can pull the parts out after, hopefully. So I'll need to preserve that. If we could put any glass in this, I'll need to make sure we really carefully keep everything on there, maybe even vacuum it to pull it all really tight. And so far I have the base here, which is going to be where the glass will sit, and then this larger piece is the trim ring. So this will all end up upside down. I want there to be a taper on this edge as we come off the sides for the glass, so that I'll be able to put this piece in place, and then I already have a taper provided so that I can glue up the successive deck layers back onto that to get a nice joint between this piece here and the rest of the deck. So to do that, I was trying to make some really big wedges. Came up with this here. So this is a 5-inch wide piece of wood, and it has a knife edge. This is pretty much 20-to-1. So that's the scarf that we want to see on the fiberglass. And I was able to do this by pushing this end up with another piece of material and running this through the planer. So that seemed to work pretty well. You know, trying to cut this on the table saw or something like that would be a total nightmare. You could perhaps sand it. Why don't we go ahead and make a couple more of these so that we have enough to lay this around the part. We'll glue the whole thing down onto a board, and then we'll start prepping it for fiberglass. Here we go. And that's sort of the plan right there. So you can kind of maybe picture it if you kind of invert it in your brain, turn it upside down. That's how the part would come out off of this. So we'll get busy now gluing this all down. By tomorrow we should be able to put some glass on this, finish it up. Pretty exciting. Welcome back to the shop. It's the following day, and I've powered down the vacuum after several hours last night. We were just using regular wood glue to hold all this MDF together on our mold, and you might have noticed there was a lot of bridging here in the part, and that's not what you typically want in a vacuum bag setup, but since this was just being used to clamp the wood down and not actually laminating, all of those voids are not really a problem. I was able to monitor the alignment of all the pieces that I wanted, and it looks like we got a really good result. So we'll open the bag up now to see what we have. It looks pretty good. We had some glue to clean up around some of the edges where there was a little bit of squeeze out. I want to get some glass in here. We have a low spot where this one panel ended up just a little bit under the other ones. Put one layer of CSM in there to try and bring that up, and then we'll put another layer of glass on the whole thing. Hopefully, we'll see how that works, and then it should be ready to kind of do a final finish before we pull a part off. So stick around. All right, the first piece of glass ready to go now. I think we're gonna go ahead and put all the rest of this on. So I have one layer of CSM that I've cut out to accept that part in the middle, and I've torn the edges of it so that I'll be able to hopefully get a nice feather, and I'll lay some other pieces in there. I'm anticipating this is going to be a little bit of a gong show, if you understand that reference. And we're gonna see how it goes. This is a bit of an experiment, but I'm gonna use vacuum to pull it all down so I get really nice tight radiuses and everything pulled in really well, because with all these curves, I'm not sure what I should be using to do that. So we're gonna give that a try. I've got all the other materials cut out, and we'll be rolling in the edges with the fin roller for the corners. We are going to leave that now to cook for a little while, and if you're appreciating the video so far, it would mean a lot to me if you'd hit that like button down below. The algorithm just seems to love it when you do that, and I appreciate it as well. So thank you very much. And now we are going to take a look up at that bulwark that we've been drying out since the last video, see how that's coming along. In case you're new here to the project, this bulwark that we're talking about turned out to be full of rotten plywood, and that was an unfortunate discovery that I wasn't anticipating. It is what it is. So the project now is to remove all of that old wood, dig it out, mostly with a chainsaw, and then we're going to dry it to put new foam in here, restore the structural integrity of this really important piece of the boat. So in the last video, we rigged up this contraption here to draw air from the forward end of the bulwark, and then about 4 feet back, we're pulling it out through this exhaust fan. So we have air that can circulate through the system, and then we've injected some heat using a standard hairdryer there. And now I have it on a duty cycle timer. That's why you're not hearing it at the moment. Since it's not technically rated for 100% duty cycle, I thought it would be good to let it cool down ever so often. Currently, it runs out 8 hours a day with the on-off cycling, and at that 12.5 amps, with the cost of electricity around here, it costs me about $2 a day to run that heater through this system. And I guess the question is it worth it? Is it actually doing anything, or just looking pretty sitting at the front there of the bow? I've been marking the humidity numbers here along the side of the boat with the given date, so I can sort of track the trend as the humidity hopefully moves down. And now on these ones here, I forgot to mark the baseline before we did any of the wood removal. That's probably more like 24-25%. So there's an immediate drop when you remove the wet wood, but it's still not in that lower zone that I want to see before I put any materials back into here. To track these humidity readings, we're using the Tramex Skipper Plus. This is a great little tool. It's expensive, but man, is it ever handy. And so this is telling me right now, yeah, we're at the same reading as what we took last night. It's showing 17, and the first reading that I took almost a month ago was 18. So maybe we've dropped 1%. And anyway, the short of it is, I don't know if it's worth investing much more into that little heater. Now, there's been a lot of activity in the comments of the last video, as there usually is, and thank you for everyone that is commenting on the videos. And it looks like what a lot of people are suggesting, and I agree, is a dehumidifier is probably better overall and cheaper to run than a heat source, especially because most of that heat is just getting pumped right out this end back into the shed, and that just creates more condensation in here. I think what I'd like to do though is get the entire bulwark opened up around the whole boat, and then I'll basically have a return path right here at the beginning, and it'll be easy to set up essentially a loop, and I'll be able to run the air through a loop, add a dehumidifier of some sort, and then as the temperatures increase too into the spring and then eventually the summer, this is probably going to get nice and dried out. We're going to pull the heat source out, and I have one other idea that I might give a try. In the comments, somebody was recommending a desiccant dehumidifier, which is a product I'm not actually familiar with, and I'm curious to look into them. The one that they recommended is a UK-based product, so it runs on the wrong voltage. Well, not wrong, just different. And so it's not going to work for over here. But that reminded me of something else that I have holding on to in the shop here, and I totally forgot about. So these are desiccant, big desiccant capsules, and this is from a company called H2 Out, and this is a product that, this is one of their larger offerings, and basically it's just full of those pink and blue desiccant spheres, and this can be fully recharged. It's a stainless steel case. This is not sponsored, by the way. I just happen to have these and I think they're kind of cool. Interested to give them a try here. We'll put a link to them down below. So it's rechargeable. You put it in the oven at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 to 3 hours, and then all of the little marbles inside turn from pink back to blue. And this one's still kind of warm because I recently recharged it last night, and they were all pink when I pulled it out, and now they are looking nice and blue, although it is kind of hard to see. My thought now is just to put this inside that entry air path. I actually have two. I have a smaller one as well, so we might as well put both in there. And then we'll see if these help absorb moisture from the incoming air and shoot it out the back. We'll go ahead and fire these inside the cavity there, turn the circulation fan back on. This is a 70-watt fan. It's like basically runs for free. So I'll draw the air circulation through here, add these, see if we get any movement. And anyway, there you go, step 2. Now, this bulwark project has turned out to be a massive endeavor. I don't want to subject you all to the same every week. We're going to save you more bulwark sequences, although I am still working on that pretty full time here. And right now we have pushed back on the port side to the chain plate area, so we're about midships. So we're making good progress, but it is tedious work. And I thought I'd give you just a few updates on how that's going. And the first update is actually right behind you. You'll see here that the very first stanchion base mounting location is pretty grungy, it looks rusty, it's dirty, and then the one right behind it is actually quite clean. And so these are the stanchion bases here. They're bolted onto the bulwark and they hold the rails that support all the lifelines. And these forward two are actually for the pulpit of the boat. It's probably the case that this forward one on the port side was never sealed very well, and that might be why it's rusty and streaky. The previous owner is probably fighting with it to keep those bolts tight, and the reason for that being that there was no backing plates in there. So all the ones that I've removed so far have these, looks like either bronze or brass backing plate. You can see the threaded fasteners there. And so the bolts were going into just fiberglass and some resin, nothing really to hold on to. That probably explains why that's so dirty, and we'll be able to fix that as we go back. And this probably brings me to one of several questions that I wanted to ask you, the viewers, during this video. It's been really interesting for me to see the kinds of comments that come up in all of these videos. There seem to be a lot of really experienced people watching these videos that have an interest in what we're doing here. And so I thought I would ask and see what you all think about putting in for backing plates. These are probably not going to work to go back in since they are already drilled out and they don't have a lot of extra material on them. And I'm not even sure what this is yet. I'm going to get this tested to see if it's a brass alloy or if it's more in the bronze family. Seeing as they're in pretty decent shape and they have definitely been soaking in water for 30 years, they're probably in the bronze range. And so I'd like to do what I can to keep them, but we'll see about that. So I'm wondering if it makes sense to put something like that back in. Now, it's incredibly expensive to buy bronze sheet stock or bar stock to try to put these back in. I was actually blown away with the cost of material, but I wondered about maybe using G10. I've understood that if the fastener that's used, if you have at least 1.5 times the fastener diameter in terms of the thickness of the backing plate, that the G10 will support that bolt and it'll probably break the bolt before the threads do. But I'm not sure about that, and I wanted to maybe test that, see if there's any community knowledge about that out there. Have you ever tried to tap G10? Are those threads that you'd rely on, or would you stick with metal? Stainless I don't really like because of course we have that concern about crevice corrosion. That's why we're going to be digging those stainless chain plates out of this boat. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down below about replacement backing plate ideas. Be really curious. Now over on the port side, and we're just about to the first chain plate you see here. So like I said, we're almost halfway down this side of the boat. We've made pretty good progress, but it is just a continual slog pulling all this old wood fiber out of the boat. And even when you do think you have it cleaned, I'm still finding there's lots of wood fiber adhering to the sides. So I do have to clean up the sides, and I am using the 3/4 inch chisel for a lot of that work. And so it's kind of like cleaning the bathroom floor with a toothbrush, it feels like. I've also been using the burr bits on the die grinder, and this works really well. Unfortunately, this doesn't reach the bottom of the cavity, but I might have something coming that's a little bit longer. So we'll see if that works out. Stay tuned for that in a future video. I have thought about ways to maybe go with something bigger, faster, stronger, but to get anything in here, I have to go down almost 9.5 inches to get to the bottom of this cavity. So like rotary sanders, things with big discs, I'm not really sure how I could get that in there and control it with any real measure. It would probably create a cloud of dust in here as well. So it's slow going, but it's careful, clean work using these small hand tools, and it's getting the job done, but a lot of work. And now this area was actually covered with some fiberglass repair before I cut in, and I was really interested to know what might have occurred that led someone to remove the cap rail here, open this up, and then put new material down. The filler inside here looked to be epoxy. It kind of had that white pearlescent finish to it, like you get with epoxy once it's mixed with silica. So somebody was in here before doing a repair, but I'm not sure what the goal was because all this plywood is still in here. We'll keep pulling this out. I'm gonna keep it more or less behind the scenes unless I find other exciting updates. Well, while I stay up here and keep working on this, why don't you guys head back down below, and then another version of me will show you something different. Welcome back to the shop, and the CSM first layer here of the mold has cured up. So we're ready to take this bag off and see how it looks. I'm anticipating that we're gonna have a little bit of fun because you may have noticed in the previous take that I forgot to put in those little tiny strips of release fabric on the corners of the mold where there's those little gaps. So I think we're gonna have some resin that's adhered to the breather in those cases. So we are gonna have to probably do some interesting removal there. But anyway, let's open it up and see how it goes. all the layers of the bag pulled off. It looks pretty good. There's a few small problems, but overall I'm happy with it for now. So the top here, you'll see some glass fibers that have not been wet out, and that I was planning. That's gonna just come off easily with a grinder when I go to clean up the top of the piece. There is, though, some lumps that I find around certain areas. Maybe I didn't use enough pressure on the vacuum bag. Perhaps this is an application where going as high as possible would have made sense to try to push all those layers down and bring the resin up into the breather to be pulled off as waste. But at any rate, we're gonna have to smooth these out, so we'll take those down with a sander and see if we can't get that all fixed up in the shape pretty good. But overall, it feels pretty good. So we're almost ready to get this thing finished out. Let's get this cleaned up with the sander and see how it looks after that. After a bit of light sanding and then coming back with body filler to catch any low spots, that part's looking really good. I'll be ready to lay some glass in there for some new prism housings very soon. If you're going to be in the Vancouver area for the 2025 International Vancouver Boat Show at the end of January, we would love it if you'd stop by and say hi. We're going to be hanging out there with some other adventurers and creators on the Friday afternoon and also on the Saturday. We'll post the times that we'll be there here. And why not save yourself a few bucks on your tickets? You can use the code LFS, or there's a description link down below that can help you out with that. And we'd love to see you there. So looking forward to that. If you're new to the channel and you'd like to get caught up from the start of the story, rewind to the beginning. The playlist right there will help you out. And the best thing you can do to show this channel a little bit of love right now is to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and it is right there. See y'all next time. And these two openings here. Openings? Opening. Opening. I hope that they are still openings. So you're sitting on the throne. It's nice to have a little bit of natural light for reading whatever it is that you happen to be indulging in. That sounds weird.